and excused for a week. So maybe not starting another batch sometime next week. So you'll be joining that, right? So because I committed the time, I think I'll continue with you. So maybe now if I find somebody else, then I'll ensure that they get on the speed, and then I'll combine it with this. So for now, it's just you, right? Yeah. So if I remember correctly, you have a testing background, right?
I do have a testing background, yes.
All right. So I'll quickly go through a few slides.
Okay.
Right. So some of the SDLC slides I think we can skip because you already know about it.
But just give me. Will you be emailing me the slides?
Sure, sure. I have everything organized onto a Google Drive, so I just need to share it with you, and then you can copy the complete training material. There are these presentations, and then there is an additional reading material, and a lot of templates for you, right? So everything is there. You can just there. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So what I'll do is today's session, I'll just focus on how would things work in an organization. So typically in an IT view, the client's IT team, and then a vendor. When a project is organized. Can I put you on hold? There's a lot of disturbance coming up.
I'm going to put you on mute, and then you can go ahead. Go ahead.
Muted.
I'll just mute everybody so that I can. There's no background noise disturbing me. All right. So
I'm going to mute you. So let me know if you want to talk to me. I'm muted.
All right. Okay. Right. So let me explain you about how a typical IT org structure would be there in a client's team, right? So because you have some work-ex, maybe you're cleared with this to an extent, but it will be more like a refresher for you. So usually the IT side of the client's team is divided into these three main units: the development, the QA, and then the ops, right? So the responsibilities are clearly demarcated. Development would focus on developing the solution. So the requirements, development, everything would come under the purview of the development team. Then the QA would test the system. So the UAT would be coordinated by the the QA team. And once the solution is accepted, the system is accepted, it's handed over to the operations team, and they would manage the live system, right? So to support all this from a functional point of view, you would have the business team supporting it, right? So any functionality related requirement would be dealt with the business units who would be actually using the system, right? So the end users would be again the team from the business unit team, depending on the scope of the system. But the IT side of it is clearly demarcated into these three units. The reason being, to reduce a conflict of interest, right? If you ask the same person who has developed it to test the system also, he would say that absolutely it's fine. There's no errors with it, right? So there are no defects and the system is working fine, right? So clearly the development and the QA needs to be demarcated. So that's what the teams would, the development team and the QA team would focus on. One would focus on development, the other would be focused on testing, right? And these teams again, could be actually liaising with a outsourced vendor, right? So somebody like an Accenture, IBM, or a TCS, who are actually doing the development, but these guys would be the the approvers or responsible for those kind of tasks, right? Then once it's tested, it's handed over to the operations team. So the operations team would manage the the live system, and if there are any end of day batches which needs to be run, they would ensure that they are running properly, right? And ensure that the system is up and running 24/7 or as per the requirement. Then there is enough data, the database size, and then the CPUs, the time and everything, they would be monitoring and ensure that if any customer raises any defects or has some problem with the system, right? So they will also be handled by the operations team. So that's the kind of work which an operations team would take, right? So as a business analyst, you would mostly interact with the SMEs who would guide the functionality from the business units, right? So your interaction with these teams would be limited, with the development team would be limited. With the QA team, if you are actually involved in the UAT, then you would be coordinating with them a lot. So all the defects which are raised by the QA team would be handled by you. You would ensure that they are passed on to the the vendor team or your team. They fix it, and then you would take it back to the client and get it tested out, right? So again, from an operations team, it's limited interactions. So mostly it would be the SMEs from the business unit team, and then maybe the QA team if you're involved in testing, right? So the development team and operations team, the interactions are limited, and this is how a typical org structure is, client's org structure is there in most of the mature organizations. It's not that each and every organization has to have the same. There are new models coming up, like some organizations are following a DevOps kind of methodology and all that. So so this is mostly commonly or widely used org structure, right? Similarly, most of the IT companies are organized into these horizontals and verticals, right? Verticals are focused on a particular industry, like a bank or an insurance or maybe in healthcare, right, or a retail, right? So their focus is on a particular industry. They identify what are the requirements in that particular industry, and what is it that what kind of solutions or what are the needs of that particular industry is what they would focus on, right? Then there are horizontal teams which focus on a particular technology, like an Oracle applications or SAP or Java, .NET, right, or an Pega, right? There would be technology groups who would focus on that particular technology, and then their core expertise would be the technology. Now, usually the new business would be coming out from the account managers who would actually liaise with the customers, right, and then identify the opportunities. So they would in turn would coordinate with the horizontal teams, and then propose solutions, and then finally when a project comes up, so it will be a combination of your delivery, the horizontal team, the delivery team, and then the account team overseeing it, right? So that's how a typical project org structure would look like, and this is how they generally operate, right? So the vertical would focus on new business, ensure that the client is happy with the delivery, and you get more business from that particular client. And horizontals focus more on a particular technology and then the delivery of that, the project, right? And then there are support organizations like your, the audits, and then your quality groups, and then you have your sales and the pre-sales team supporting the new pursuits, right? And ensuring that all those proposals which you are sending for new business are good, right? And then the sales would focus on getting more new clients, and then the billing would be handled by the CFO. So that's a typical org structure in an IT company. Not that all the IT companies would follow the same structure, but this is the most commonly used one, right? Now when a project is formed, there are multiple layers again, because you already have the delivery experience, it would be more like a refresher. You have the project teams from both the client and then the the IT vendor side. So for a typical client, you could have multiple projects running parallelly, right? So then for each project you would have an offshore and an on-site team, and depending on the size of the project, you could have both an on-site PM and an offshore PM, or just a lead on one side and the project manager being on the other side, right? So if it's a lot of technology focus, maybe he would be a offshore project manager, and if it needs to be the requirements are critical, he might be an on-site project manager, right? So depending on that, the project managers would be there, and they would interact with each other. On-site team's responsibility primarily would be to understand the requirements and document it, right? And the offshore would develop the system based on the requirements which are documented. And finally, on-site team would liaise with the customer to ensure that the system is tested and then finally accepted, right? So that's how the responsibilities are divided between on-site and offshore. Overseeing them is an account and a delivery manager, both at on-site and offshore. On-site, the account manager's responsibility is to ensure that the client is happy with the services being provided. If there are any escalations from the particular project, it will go on to the account manager. He will try to resolve them, right? And then any new business coming in, the account manager gets involved, ensure that the proposals are submitted on time, right? And his primary job is to ensure that the customer is happy with the services, and you're getting more business, right? So the delivery manager's focus is to ensure that the deliveries of the projects are happening on time, on quality and schedule, right? So and within the cost, obviously. So that's a mandate of a delivery manager. So he oversees all the project managers or the delivery of the projects from the offshore. Account managers would manage the relationship with the client, and overseeing about them is the senior management in the company, which is generally the the delivery heads or a particular vertical head or a horizontal head, right? So they would review that particular account on a quarterly basis or a half-yearly basis and ensure that they take stock of the situation, right? And similarly, at the client side, you would have the project team, which constitutes the team from development, QA, ops, and as well as the SMEs from the business unit, right? Over and above them is a project management committee, which generally has the client and then the the business unit managers, the project managers, and then the business unit managers who would take decisions on on anything related to the project, right? And then you have a PMO projects and reporting. Over and above them sits the BU heads and the IT heads, so who would oversee the projects, and if something goes wrong, they will try to correct it and then provide guidance to the team, right? So this is how a typical project org structure looks like. So I've actually covered this a little faster because I assume that you have already worked in the industry and you know pretty much most of it, right? So if you have any doubts, I think we can spend a few minutes on this and then move ahead. Otherwise, yeah.
No, I can. This is okay. I can understand this one.
All right. All right. So, so quickly again, I won't take a lot of time to go through the rest of the slides, right? Because this is this is standard stuff, SDLC. What I would focus is on where is it that a business analyst would need to contribute and what is his main role, right? So yeah, so let me first explain what are the various phases, and then we'll look at what a business analyst would be involved in, right? So first, you would ensure that the project is initiated, the budgets are allocated to it, the scope is finalized, the feasibility studies are done, the teams are identified, and people are allocated to the project, right? So phase one is pretty much activities which needs to be taken from the client side. There is very much little involvement of a business analyst in that, right? So it's mostly approving a project and ensuring that budgets are allocated to it, and then the right people are onboarded onto the project, right? So once that is done, then you would actually start planning for your project and then understanding the detailed requirements of it, right? So as part of one, you're just identifying the scope, right? Now, but that scope is at a very high level, which means it's just telling us what needs to be done. But how are you going to do it, right? And what is the who is going to use it, and when is it going to be done? All the details of the particular requirement, right, are not coming out in the scope. So that would be addressed in your requirements. So let me give you an example. I think that would make it clear, right? Now let's say I'm developing a mobile banking application, and then the project scope would be I should be able to check my account balance. I should be able to transfer funds, or I should be able to uh, pay some bills, right? So this is some high level functionality what I want. So this kind of requirement at a high level is called as a scope, right? But when I say I want to view my account balance, right, how does the screen look like? Who would be the person doing that? Are there any preconditions for doing this, right? And how is the actual process going to happen? Which system are you going to ping the request to? How are you going to get the response back? So all these details are not covered in your scope, right? So those details would form the part of your requirement, right? So that is where you'll get the complete details about how is it that the scope is being met, who is using it, and when will it be done, right? Are there any conditions or things we need to take care of? All those details are captured as part of the requirement, right? So that's basically the difference between a scope and a business requirement. So phase one, you will identify the overall scope, and then identify what could be the budget of the project, and then allocate the budgets and people. Then phase two is wherein you would plan for the detailed project. So this planning would be the primary responsibility of a project manager. A project manager owns a complete end-to-end plan of how are you going to capture your requirements, what is it that how much time it would take, design, build, who is going to be involved in that. So all those details are the responsibility of a project manager, but he would take the inputs from the various stream leads. Like for the business requirements, it would be a business analyst who would be providing it, and for design and development, it would be the technical architect who would be providing the details about what are the detailed activities and who are going to do it, how much time it would take. All those details would be given by those respective leads. Similarly, for testing, a QA lead would give you the details about how much time it would take for testing, right? So sometimes for smaller projects, all phase 3 to 5 would generally be given by the technical architect, right? So that though the responsibility of a project manager is to prepare the plan, the inputs would be coming from the various respective owners. So similarly, as a business analyst, you will have to contribute for the requirements related activities, right? So you would identify the detailed activities, then identify the timelines, and then the resources available who will be working on those requirements, and when you would be doing what. All those details would be captured during your project planning, and then you would start gathering the requirements. Now gathering the requirements has two major steps. First, you will understand the requirements. You will have to coordinate with the customers team, identify the teams, the various stakeholders, and then understand the requirements from them and document them, right? So your business requirements are primarily owned by you as a business analyst, which are also called as the functional requirements. Then there are some non-functional requirements, popular also called as NFR, non-functional requirements, or technical requirements, right? So which basically constitutes things like your performance requirements or your security requirements, audit requirements, right? Then your maybe your availability requirements, performance requirements, all these things which are not related to the functionality of the system, but which needs to be captured for capturing the system, for developing the system, would be captured as the technical requirements. So these are predominantly handled by the technical architect, right? So, but yeah, I mean, if you are a in a techno-functional kind of role and you understand technology a bit, as a business analyst, you can even capture those requirements, right? So when we actually discuss the business requirements document, I'll get into the details about what is it that we capture at each one of these, and then try to understand that, right? So as part of the requirements definition, you would be involved in this planning activities, wherein you will provide the detailed work breakdown structure. Then your the capturing of the requirements, understand the requirements from the customer and then document them, right? So this is primarily done using use cases, right? So the use cases would be developed by the business analyst. The technical requirements would be generally handled by a technical architect, and finally all these requirements are documented into a single document called as a business requirements document, or popularly called as BRD, right? So that's the main deliverable coming out of phase 2, right? So once these the BRD is prepared or written, then you submit it to the customer for review. The customer would look at the requirements, then he would finally have to approve it, saying that okay, all the requirements are captured in this document, and you have to deliver a system which are adhering to these specifications, right? So that's a major milestone of the project. So the BRD sign off, which is from phase 2, and your role as business analyst would be significant in that, right? So once the BRD is signed off, then it's mostly the technical team who would be involved in it from phase 3 and 4. So your design and build activities would be handled by the technical architects and then the programmers. So parallelly, the testing activities would also start. So when I say testing, the test strategy preparation and then your the test data preparation, all those activities would be parallelly happening to your phase 3 and 4, right? So once the system is developed and then the unit testing is completed, then you would the QA team would do one round of integration and then the complete system testing, right? And then take it to the customer to ensure that the client's team tests out. So that's called as the user acceptance testing, or UAT, or sometimes called as a business acceptance testing also, right? So once that is completed, you would be handing it over to the operations team. So they would create the the final environment and then ensure that all those migrations or any data conversions which needs to be done, everything is completed, and finally and give access to the end users, right? So that's called as a go live of the system, right? So after that, the maintenance kicks in, wherein if any defects are raised by the users, or the daily batches which needs to be run, or ensuring that the system is up and running, all those activities would be considered as a maintenance and operations activities, right? So your role as a business analyst predominantly would be in phase 2, wherein you own the deliverable of business requirements document. Then during phase 3 and 4, it's mostly a support role, wherein you would validate the the design, or maybe their understanding of the requirement, right? Then phase 5, you would coordinate with the customer on identifying what are the defects, maybe analyzing them, right? Is it a the test case related defect, or is it a actual data related defect, or a the functionality related defect? You do those analysis and then provide your inputs to the development team for fixing it, right? And phase 6 and 7, your role is limited, right? So throughout the 7 phases, you have to ensure that the scope of the project is not changing, or if it is even changing, it is going through a detailed change management process. So how do we manage the scope and then the change, we'll learn later in the course. But yeah, that's generally what is done in a typical SDLC life cycle. And yeah, any doubts in this, or specifically on the role of a business analyst, or anything you want to?
No, you're clear.
All right.
Yeah, I understand so far.
Yeah. So I think it's more like a refresher for you because you have this technical background, right? So
yes.
Yeah. So the simplest of it is the waterfall model. You would use it when the requirements are crystal clear, right? So there is very little chance of the requirements changing during the course of the project, right? The timelines are not too long, like maybe it's a 6-month project, right? And it's a simple project, and the risks involved in the project are limited, So this is a kind of project which will generally go, right? So you'll do your requirements first, sign off the BRD, then take on the design and then coding, finally test the system, and then hand it over to the operations team, right? So this is a typical flow of events in a waterfall model. All right. So clearly the advantages would be that it's a simple framework. It's easy to understand, and the responsibilities are clear, right? And the overheads are less, right? And easier to execute. It won't work if the requirements are changing a lot, and if there are too many risks involved in it, so this might not be the right model to go ahead with, right? So again, see, it's not a business analyst decision to decide what kind of project we should get into, right? It's generally handled by the delivery teams, the project managers, and the project plan would ensure that they're aligned to these models, right? So you just need to understand that these are how a typical projects are executed, right? Because you're part of the team, you need to understand how what are the various models of SDLC, right? So just know that these are the various phases of the project. That's good enough information for you at this point in time. As a project manager, you would have to a project manager has to decide what would be the model relevant for that particular scenario, right? So you won't actually decide what kind of model to go ahead with, right? So that's the summary what I wanted to say, right? So V-shaped model is generally used wherein the systems are mission critical, wherein you need highly reliable systems. The testing needs to be done at multiple levels, right? So ensure that there are no defects coming out in your live system or live environment, right? So your testing again would be aligned to these intermediate phases, like your unit testing would be based on your detailed specifications, right? Which means the test cases are actually derived from your detailed specifications. Similarly, the integration test cases are derived from your high-level design, and your operational test cases are derived from your detailed requirements, right? So though there is a little more overhead and overlap of testing, right, you ensure that the systems are highly reliable and ensure that you have done the testing end to end before you actually move it into the production environment, right? So this is a model which I think you need to understand because the prototyping model is specifically relevant during the requirements phase, right? So as the name suggests, prototype is where you would create a model or a dummy thing which basically shows how your final product would look like without having that underlying functionality, right? So the way you go about it is that you would create some quick and dirty model of how your system would look like, take it to the customer. The customer would try to understand the system, provide his feedback. Then you will go back, refine your requirements, then refine your prototype, and then once the customer is clear with the requirements, you would provide a sign off, and then the rest of the phases would follow, wherein you will do design, coding, testing, and maintenance, right? So the prototyping is relevant only during your requirements phase, wherein you are creating some quick and dirty models so that the customer understands what's happening or how your final product would look like, right? So this model is generally used where the customer is not able to visualize how the final product would look like, right? So it's difficult for a customer or end user or a subject matter expert to give approval if he doesn't know what the final product would look like. So what do? You create some screens. So you either show it, maybe draw the outline of the screen and show it, or you could actually create in that particular technology and show it, right? Like some maybe you will create some HTML pages and then show it to the customer. So this is how your system would look like, right? But the underlying logic is not built. So the intention or objective of this prototype is to get the customer's approval onto the requirements, right? So you'll create those prototypes, take it to the customer, get their feedback, and once your requirements are finalized, then your actual design, coding, and testing would continue. Right now, this is important to you as a business analyst because you would be actually involved in all of these phases, right? So, so prototyping is again a method of requirement elicitation also. So we'll revisit that when we are actually discussing the requirement elicitation methodology, and then try to understand how prototyping works. All right. Then we also have the spiral model, wherein you'll try to identify the most significant risks of the project upfront, resolve them, and then create some POCs to ensure that those risks are resolved, and then progress with the further development of the project. Right. So the main reason for going for spiral models is large and complex projects where there are too many risks. Now let's take a scenario wherein you are spending some 100 million for a project, and it's spread over like 4 years of time frame, and you don't really want to wait like 4 years and then spend $100 million and finally realize that your project is a failure, right? So you actually want to identify what are the risks of the project upfront and see whether you can address them right away, and if they cannot, you just want to close off on or shelve the project, right? So that's basically is the way of working of a spiral model. So you'll identify what are the key risks of the project, right? So do some proof of concept or create some ensure that those risks are resolved. Then you do the development for that particular thing, and then look at the next set of risks available for the project, right? So you're going in spirals, and with each spiral you have a better system which is developed, right? So by the end of the last spiral, your final system would be developed, right? So you are not waiting till the end of the project to realize what are your key risks and then doing it, right? So you're actually creating those prototypes, and each prototype is addressing some of your risks, and then your system is coming out in phases. All right. So that's the spiral model for you, right? And agile methodology is one of the key things which is upcoming now, right? So most of these analytical projects or mobile related projects tend to go with these agile methodologies, right? So the main advantage of agile methodologies is that you're not wasting too much time in documentation and then bureaucracy of the project, right? So which is the paperwork and ensuring those approvals, formal sign-offs and all, right? So the Scrum methodology, so again, agile is generally a overarching theme, and Scrum model is one of the ways in which you can is one of the agile methodologies basically, right? So it doesn't follow the the traditional SDLC models, and these are the different ways in which you would understand the or rather develop the system to overcome the disadvantages of a typical SDLC model, right? So Scrum model is one of those popular models which is evolving. You generally tend to have a Scrum master who would handle the role of a coordinator or a project manager kind of role in this project, and the way it executes is, what you do is you will identify the project and then look at the functionality or the features of the system, right? So then you would break it down into those work buckets or work items as we call it, with each work item providing a feature of the system, right? So generally, or a thumb rule would be you take a week or 2 weeks work to create a work item, right? So the intention of Scrum methodology is to ensure that you're reducing your cycle times, right? So your time to market is faster, right? So the way you do it is, first you will identify the the work items or the key features of the system and then prioritize them. So the most high priority items are the first ones which you will develop, so that you get the maximum utility out of the system by focusing on these highest priority ones, right? So then some desired functionality or some good to have functionality would be low priority ones, and then they would be developed later, right? So for each work item you would go through this iteration of understanding the requirements, then your development, and then your testing, and finally feedback, right? So it's a lot interactive here. There are no formal documents coming out of it, right? So there is more of a whiteboarding kind of session which you'll do to understand and document the requirements. So that methodology is called as user stories. So we'll also learn that as part of your requirements documentation, right? So these are the this is the way in which you would use a Scrum methodology to develop your system, right? So the advantage of a Scrum methodology is that you're getting a working system within the first few weeks of the start of the project, right? So you don't have to wait till the end of the project to see how your final system would look like, right? So the highest priority or the most valuable functionality is coming out in the first few iterations, and the feedback also goes to the team from the customers or the end users who are using the system, right? So those in turn would be again used to prioritize your work, and then in each iteration you will be developing some functionality. All right. So there are some limitations or disadvantages of this. Usually scope tends to increase when you are going for a Scrum model, because people who want to get in their wish list and then ensure that you're not focusing only on the functionality what you have identified earlier, and then it keeps on increasing, right? So this is also called as a scope creep. And another disadvantage is that the empowerment of the team, if it is not there, right? If the team is not able to decide whether how a typical functionality or the changes to the functionality can happen or not, it becomes difficult to execute, right? So because your decisions usually happen during these iterations, right? If you are dependent on somebody else to take those decisions, right, it delays the work, and it actually defeats the purpose of this, right? And you need a Scrum Master to actually ensure that these interactions are happening properly, and ensure that this model works, right? So those are some of the limitations, but if you ensure that these are taken care of, it has its own set of advantages, right? So you have a faster time to markets, and then lower documentation, or rather wastage of time on bureaucracy, right? So that's basically the advantage coming out of Scrum, right? Yeah. Any doubts till now? Or
no, you can go on.
Yeah, so that's pretty much what I had to share for today. In fact, I actually rushed through. I generally take a couple of days to give this introductory session, but because it's just you, and then you already have a background, I actually rushed through. I hope it's because I didn't want to bore you with those things what you already know. So maybe we can focus a lot more on the newer things. So I thought I just took it with a faster pace. So let me know your feedback. I mean, if you feel that I'm going a little faster.
No, you're fine. You're fine. Others I will slow you down. Don't worry.
Right. Yeah. So I think this is another slide what I wanted to discuss. Maybe it will help you align to get to your next role. Maybe if project management is of interest for you, right?
Yeah.
So there are a lot of overlapping activities what you do with a in a business analyst role, right? Just give me a minute.
No problem.
All right. Okay. So similar to like business analyst book of knowledge, like the 5 knowledge areas what we have, a PM's role also has these 9 knowledge areas, right? So they have to ensure that these 9 knowledge areas are managed throughout the the project life cycle. So the project has these 5 life cycles: initiation, planning, execution, monitoring, and then closure, right? So all of these 9 areas again would fall under each one of these phases, and then you have to do some specific tasks. So as a business analyst, you would be involved, you're already doing scope management, right? So you would be doing your risk management and the communication management. You're involved in that, right? So we learn how to manage risks, how to manage the communication, how to manage scope, right? And you'd also learn about the the scheduling and then the time management of the project. Quite a few overlaps, and over a period of time, logically, you'll tend to get onto the other things like your procurement of HR and then the cost, and a typical role extension would be to a PM's role from a business analyst role, right? So I think I just wanted to relate those two things, like what is it that you are doing and what is it that the project manager would do, and where are the gaps, so that if this is of future interest for you, then you can actually look at where do I need to work on to get into this kind of roles.
Okay.
Right. So starting next session, we would actually get into the each one of these knowledge areas.
Okay.
So we'll start off with the requirements planning. What are the activities which we'll do as part of the planning, and take each one of those knowledge areas one at a time, right? The 5 knowledge areas, right, from planning till testing, and then our enterprise analysis.
Okay. And
right?
you will be sharing these slides with me, right?
Yeah. If I'll check with the coordinators and get your email ID, right?
No problem. What is your email ID, and can you email me with your phone number just in case, if we are missing the class or something, so that I can call you?
No, because this is anyway one-on-one sessions. If you're not available, just drop me a note. I'll share the email ID with you.
Please do.
Right? If you have a Gmail ID, it would be better, because
yeah.
I can.
I sent you my Skype ID.
Yeah.
Skype, no, that's singid@gmail.com.
All right. All right.
I'll just text you.
All right. I'll share the material with you, and I will be available on that email ID. Right.
Okay.
So, all right.
Yeah.
So,
thank you so much.
So same time tomorrow again. We'll
okay.
Again.
Yeah.
Right? Have a nice day. Bye bye.
Oh, thank you for helping me, Raju.
Welcome. Always.
Yeah. I guess I have to say good night to you then.
Yeah.